This is the moment police raid the home of a mother
Stop taking pictures of me!
and a son suspected of violent disorder in Middlesbrough.
Freedom of speech is deontological, and it certainly can't be deontological if you are going as a police force to arrest an 11-year-old. It's simply baffling, and it will lead to civil war.
So is it possible to destroy freedom within just 2 months in a democratic society? Certainly, Tier Keir Starmer, the UK's terrifying new authoritarian leader, is making a damn good stab at it. As his vision of a joyless socialist surveillance state takes hold, it has now emerged that he is planning to ban smoking in outdoor spaces, including outside stadiums and in pub beer gardens, which will effectively kill off the British boozer forever. And does he have a hint of remorse or regret about this overwhelmingly horrified reaction from ordinary Brits today? Of course not.
It's being reported that you're looking at tighter restrictions on smoking outdoors, pub gardens, outdoor restaurants, outside hospitals and so on. Is that something that you are considering?
My starting point on this is to remind everyone that over 80,000 people lose their lives every year because of smoking. That's a preventable death. It's a huge burden on the NHS. And of course, it's a burden on the taxpayer. So yes, we are going to take decisions in this space. More details will be revealed, but this is a preventable series of deaths, and we've got to take the action to reduce the burden on the NHS and reduce the burden on the taxpayer.
You said when you became Prime Minister you wanted politics to tread more lightly on people's lives. This is the opposite, isn't it?
Look, I think it's important to get the balance right, but everybody watching this who uses the NHS will know that it's on its knees. We have to relieve the burden, and that's why I spoke before the election about moving to a preventative model when it comes to health. I want the NHS back on its feet, but I also want it fit for the next, 75 years, just as we've had a brilliant 75 years already. And that means taking action in relation to preventable deaths, and these are 80,000 a year preventable deaths.
Labour.
Why don't you just stop us leaving the house, driving in our cars, eating McDonald's? I mean, you can imagine the red steam pouring out of Nigel Farage's ears.
Labour are going to ban smoking in public places like beer gardens and pubs. They're obviously determined to close the last of the British pubs down. But it's all because we're going to be smoke-free by 2030. Really? Do you reckon we'll be drugs-free as well by 2030? It's all nonsense. What they're doing is they're taking, through banning where we can smoke, through putting taxes up on cigarettes, they're turning illegal activity and putting it into the hands of criminal gangs. You don't believe me? Look at Australia, where cigarettes are 35 quid a packet. The big drug dealers don't bother with cocaine anymore. They just sell illegal cigarettes. It's led to gang warfare and 97 firebombings in Melbourne in the last 2 years. Now, you won't hear that anywhere else, will you?
No, of course you won't, because it goes against the narrative. Our superstar panellist Alex Armstrong posted on X today, Tier Keir is the biggest threat to freedom and fair justice in the United Kingdom since 1945. The first ever UKIP MP, Douglas Carswell, wrote, Keir Starmer's only achievement will be to reawaken Britain's love of liberty. And I do agree with that, actually. I think it's this state overreach that is going to see Farage become Prime Minister in 2029. So no wonder Starmer keeps on making hysterical warnings about the so-called far right, with the AfD set to storm power in Germany. But as my friend Alison Pearson of the Daily Telegraph pointed out, Starmer's bromance with the German Chancellor Scholz may be brief. The elections this weekend could see a right-wing earthquake in Germany. AfD may get 32% of the vote, while Scholz's SPD collapses. If they get less than 10%, Scholz may have to resign as Chancellor. Ignore immigration concerns at your peril. But you know, and I know, the term far right is now meaningless. An offensive phrase used to bracket those of us considered centrist actually a few years ago, who believe in sovereignty and borders and saving our once great culture from a dystopian invasion. But Starmer has chosen his bogeyman and he's sticking to it. And the question is what sort of society we will have left by 2029, and will it simply be too late to save the UK and the West? My guest today, one of the world's foremost free speech academics, is warning of a doomsday scenario. Gad Saad posted on X the maniacs who have infiltrated the West and are causing mayhem and destruction are not as much to blame as the Western politicians that have systematically allowed this to take place. There is nothing more cowardly, meek and castrated than a Western leader today. When we see what's happening on our streets, it's very difficult to disagree with his prescription. How about a pack of 50 black folk beating a lone 15-year-old British white girl close to death? She had to be rushed to hospital with internal injuries and concussion after this. Now, after watching that video, Gad did something that many in the mainstream media and many in academia in the UK are too terrified to do. He directly challenged the Prime Minister, writing, "Is this possible? What if these were your daughter? What if the races were reversed? Keir Starmer, do you have a decent bone in your body? How could this be tolerated?" But I hate to say it's tolerated every single day. As our superstar panellist Alani Dowding pointed out after the death of a 28-year-old gentle soul at a London tube station. Constant random assaults and murders in London. And we have to hear Sadiq Khan say he won't feel safe if Trump gets in. What about the rest of us? We aren't safe. Sam Winter was killed for no reason. A man named Rakeem Miles was arrested over the assault. And yet these people, who are here illegally, continue to take us for fools. Like Abdullah from Tanzania.
In the hotel, and I'm not happy in this whole situation about Home Office, because Home Office they send me message to grant me about accommodation and support, but they didn't give me enough support.
Some people may say that if you're unhappy with the food, you're unhappy with the accommodation, why don't you return to Tanzania, because Tanzania is a safe country?
So when I'm go back to home country, I'm gonna die.
Now, Gad watched that performance and posted, "Suicidal empathy plus pathological generosity plus parasitic thinking equals death of the West. Memorize this equation." Now, there was another person, one of our leaders, who knew all about that equation and warned the West and the UK what was coming.
Those who are genuine refugees, and that is determined again by the United Nations, will not be returned. Those who are illegal immigrants will be returned. And it is customary international law for countries to receive their own immigrants back into their country. And if his right honourable gentleman is suggesting that we ever get to a position when you cannot return illegal immigrants to their country of origin, then he is proposing international chaos.
Well, breaking right now, and how telling and pathetic is this? Within just weeks, possibly days of entering number 10, it has emerged that Starmer banished the portrait of the UK's greatest post-war Prime Minister. Thatcher's gone out of number 10. Shame on him. Both for the disrespect of Thatcher and the mess he's about to leave us in. But let's discuss all of this now and so much more with the aforementioned Gad Saad in our uncancelled interview. And it is a pleasure to welcome to Outspoken today one of the world's greatest minds. Gad Saad is a professor and evolutionary behavioural science, author of the best-selling, and they are brilliant books, The Parasitic Mind and The Sad Truth About Happiness. His forthcoming book on suicidal empathy, highly anticipated. And I should mention too, he has just started a visiting professorship and global ambassadorship at Northwood University. Gad Saad, absolutely brilliant to have you here today.
Oh, such a pleasure to be with you.
Are we a laughing stock, Gad? Is everyone looking at the UK thinking, what the hell has just happened in 2 months?
You actually preempted. As I was listening to your brilliant monologue, I thought, and then you put up the Iron Lady, you put up Thatcher. I said, how could it be that the country that created Winston Churchill and Margaret Thatcher is facing the current reality that it's facing? It shows you how quickly life can come at you.
Indeed, it really did. And I wanted to read, Gad, a letter that you posted recently that someone had sent to you from Europe.
Sure.
And they said, Dear Dr. Saad, after a lot of what I saw in Europe in the last few months, and also after some reading and hearing a different view, and unfortunately after being in situations where this ideology of our surroundings had a bad effect on us, I can't help but to acknowledge that you were right all along about what you have said on the Islamic ideology and migration policies in the West. I ordered The Parasitic Mind and I'm looking forward to reading it. Thank you for opening my mind, Dr. Saad. Thank you for your work, sir, and for seeking to educate our generation. So do you feel like there is finally some sort of catch-up going on? Like folk in the West are starting to recognize that actually we may have made decisions that are destroying our society?
I'd like to be optimistic and say that, yes, people are waking up, but I also have to be truthful. I fear that the awakening is happening quite late in the game, right? So it's kind of like you're losing 8-0 in the World Cup final and there is 10 minutes left in the game and you say, oh boy, I guess we better get our act together because we're playing in the World Cup final and there's only 10 minutes left. So yes, we can still turn it around, but the autocorrective mechanisms that would need to be enacted in order to fix the problem seem so cataclysmic today. I mean, they're easy to do, but they seem so difficult to implement given the zeitgeist that I can't help but feel somewhat pessimistic about the trajectory of the West.
And I mean, I know you were half joking, but you actually posted on X and you tagged in Keir Starmer saying, in case he wishes to arrest me when I visit Britain next, because you say you'd been invited to give several high-profile lectures. But the thing is, it's not actually a complete joke. We have seen folk, Gad. I know people, good people, intelligent people, intellectual people who have been arrested over the past few weeks because of posts on Facebook and X. So Starmer seems to be using lawfare to shut down opposition rather than encouraging open debate.
No kidding. I mean, do you remember the letter that went out from some French EU parliamentarian warning Elon Musk? I mean, imagine the existential chutzpah that you must have, how emboldened you must feel that you think it's a good idea to send such or to post publicly such a letter. The fact that he felt as though he would be protected by, in French, you say les bien-pensants, those who think correctly, the anointed ones, suggests that that's where we are in our society. Now, of course, apparently he didn't quite calculate properly because he did receive blowback, right? So at least there's still some hope that not everyone thought that it was a good idea to post on X a letter threatening Elon Musk with extradition to Europe to be punished. It's unbelievable.
Yeah, and there has been some blowback, but what has been so depressing for me to see, Gad, is that much of that is coming from overseas, from people like you, from people like Elon Musk, from people like Jordan Peterson. Very little from within the UK, certainly in the mainstream media space.
Now, I agree. Now, do you have any unique insight as to why British folks have allowed their society to get parasitized so quickly? I mean, before you answer, because I think it's the same answer around the world, my feeling is that the silent majority despises all this stuff, whether it be in Britain or in Canada or in the US, but somehow they are not emboldened to find their testicular fortitude or their spines. This is why I try to always speak out, because hopefully that can spark the courage under someone's feet. Is that the mechanism, in your view, that is causing Britain to fall into the abyss of infinite lunacy?
Absolutely. But the thing is, Gad, look at what happened after the Southport massacre, where Starmer went to the scene, right? And there was genuine anger. And it was from locals who were just absolutely furious that yet again, 3 beautiful young English girls with the world at their feet had been stabbed to death. We can't say much about the guy who is charged with doing it, Gad, because of the law in the UK, because we do have so many laws that actually stop me from speaking freely about this guy since he's been charged and he's awaiting trial. But Starmer was heckled really badly, right? And it was from ordinary people. It wasn't from extremists. It was just from people who were on the scene, people who were related to the kids who had died. And they were so angry. And then that anger obviously spread to the streets, and there was some violence. And Starmer, I think, did one of the most cynical things that it is possible for a leader to do. Rather than actually try and talk about the issues, talk about why people were angry, understand why people are going to be angry when 3 young, beautiful girls are stabbed to death at a Taylor Swift dance class. What he did is he demonized those people. And he also demonized people like me, Gad. I wasn't on the streets, but I do want to have a conversation. I was absolutely furious, and I remain furious, and I think it showed that he wants to rule by fear. And so at the moment, he maybe has smashed the dissent, but I don't think that will last.
No, I agree. And by the way, that speaks to something that I've discussed in the Parasitic Mind, but also in several lectures, the distinction, if I can take a minute or two to explain, between what's called deontological ethics and consequentialist ethics. So deontological ethics refers to an absolute statement of morality or truth. So for example, if I were to say to you, Dan, it is never okay to lie, it is never justified, that would be a deontological statement. On the other hand, a consequentialist statement would be, it's okay to lie if you wish to harm, to not harm someone's feelings. So for example, I often joke that if you want to have a long-lasting marriage, whenever you hear the question, do I look fat in those jeans, put on your consequentialist hat and potentially lie so that you could spare your spouses, right? Now, for many, many things in life, we all put on our consequentialist hat, and that's perfectly fine. But there's a set of foundational principles that by definition have to be deontological. The pursuit of truth in science has to be deontological. Freedom of speech has to be deontological. When your current prime minister says something akin to, I believe in freedom of speech, but the second that you incorporate the but qualifier, you're violating a deontological principle. And so I think many of the problems that we are seeing in the West today is where you're getting a intrusion of a consequentialist reflex on principle that should be inviolable. So let me give you examples of how that has arisen. So I know many people, and you probably know, you might even know the people that I'm referring to, so-called public intellectuals, who've said the following things. Oh, of course I believe in freedom of speech, but not for Donald Trump. Therefore, it was perfectly justifiable to shut down his account on what was then Twitter. Yes, I absolutely believe in presumption of innocence, but not for Brett Kavanaugh, who is now in the Supreme Court because he was a gang rapist. Yes, I believe in truth and journalistic integrity, but not when it came to Hunter Biden's laptop. That made perfect sense that we suppress it, because otherwise Orange Himmler would have come to power. So once you apply a consequentialist ethos to a deontological principle, sit back and watch your civilization die.
Well, indeed. Indeed. I think that's a perfect explanation, actually. And I think something that has really shocked people about those few days, Gad, certainly overseas, and I speak about these people a lot, is that we literally are in a bit of a dystopian state here where the prisons are full, okay? The prisons are actually full. That's no exaggeration. it's a one in, one out system now. So we have seen child rapists not put into prison. We have seen Muslim men who have beaten up young women because they are dressed in a Western way, avoid prison. Loads of examples of that. But right now in prison, and I want to show you their faces, Gad, we have Lucy Connolly. She is the wife of a conservative British politician who posted on X in anger after the Southport massacre. The case that struck me the most and really impacted me actually is Junie Sweeney. She's 53 years old, Gad. She lives a quiet life in Cheshire. She is the primary caregiver for her husband, who's very unwell. She has 3 grandchildren. She made one post, Gad, one post on Facebook. In anger, she tried to delete it. Within a minute, she is in jail for 15 months while child rapists are on the street. There's David Spring, who's a retired 61-year-old former train driver, never been in trouble with the law. He went down to Downing Street to peacefully protest, did nothing violent to the police. He is in jail. This one may be the most shocking, Gad. Lee Joseph Dunn. He is in jail only for 12 weeks, but still 12 weeks in jail, a criminal record for life. Do you know why? He shared 3 memes. And we have our leaders like Starmer saying that 2-tier justice and 2-tier policing doesn't exist. So what are we meant to do when we're literally seeing this happening? When we're seeing our neighbors, our friends being sent to jail for their words on Facebook or X?
Yeah, look, I don't wish to imply that one should be a reckless martyr, but let me draw an analogy. When the young men decided to volunteer to go to Normandy, knowing that they're going to be mowed down like little mosquitoes by the German machine guns, most of them knew that they were going to their deaths. And yet tons of them said, yeah, I'll do it. I'm up for it. So imagine the level of courage that was required of those men so that you and I could today be having this conversation, although maybe tomorrow they'll shut it down. So when people write to me, Dan, and they say, right, when people write to me and say, but you know, Professor, I can't do this because, and then they offer some justification for why they can't do it. Usually they're shocked when I respond to them without much sympathy for their justification, because I get a million death threats. I've now taken a leave of absence from my tenured job. Although I'm very excited to be, to be going to the university that you kindly mentioned earlier, Northwood University. They have a great ethos that aligns well with my free thinking. But part of the reason why Montreal is no longer a place for me to live with my family is because it is becoming exceedingly dangerous. So we all have a cost to bear, right? Whenever someone comes up to me in the streets, luckily most of them are fans, but how do I know that 1 in 100 that doesn't like me won't knife me? So boo-hoo-hoo that you might lose your job or whatever. This is a fight that we all have to fight. I'm not suggesting that you be a reckless martyr. I understand that different people have to modulate the pros and cons of how and when they should speak out. But you don't have the right to say, I wish to live in a free society with all of the freedoms that are afforded to me, but I will never lift a finger. Let Gad Saad put his neck on the line. So notwithstanding all of the scary dystopian things that you mentioned where people are being taken away to prison, if we all speak out in unison, your prime minister can't put all of us in prison.
No, indeed. And look, personally, there he is, looking a little bit like the North Korean leader there. But no, I completely agree. I mean, we last spoke when you were on my GB News show. I lost my job on GB News because of the Off Communists, which is the government censor in the UK. I'm proud now that I'm on an independent platform where I'm not censored by the government. So there are all things we can do. It hasn't been easy for me, but I think it was the right decision. However, Gad, we just saw a little bit earlier your doomsday scenario, which is one shared by Elon Musk. When you were asked, how's it all going to end, Gad? That's what we all really want to know. You said, civil war, I warned you for decades. So Explain, elaborate.
Yes. So for your viewers and listeners who may not know of my personal history, because it's going to be relevant to the prediction of civil war, I hail from Lebanon. I was born in Lebanon and I grew up. My childhood was in Lebanon. We were part of the last remaining Lebanese Jews that had steadfastly refused to leave the Middle East, despite the fact that there were warning signs everywhere that it was perhaps not healthy to be Jewish in the Middle East. And then when the civil war broke out in Lebanon, it became impossible for us to stay there, and we left. So I'm very well versed on what happens to a society that is organized along identity politics line. Now, in the context of Lebanon, everything is through the prism of which religious group you belong to. So, for example, on your ID card, your internal ID card, in Arabic, the term is hawiyya. It's like a passport, but that the cops can ask you for it if you're just driving around. Well, on that ID card, the most conspicuous element is not your height or your age or your weight or your eye color. It's what is your religion, right? And so whenever you create a society that is organized along tribal lines, things will eventually not go well. So number one, we certainly have the progressive parties that are saying, yeah, it's a great idea to use identity politics to organize everything, whether it be in science or journalism or in any context. So that's number one. Number two, when you let in an astounding number of people into your country, whether it be through legal immigration or illegal immigration, and those people do not share any of the foundational values of the host society, well, it doesn't take a fancy professor with a lot of titles to predict for you what's going to happen, right? If I drop a tennis ball 100 times, I know exactly what's going to happen 100 times. It's called gravity. So we are sowing all of the right recipe that will ensure that down the line, now I can't predict when that might be. It might be in 5 years, in 10 years, or in 50 years. But I guarantee you that when the autocorrection comes, it will be violent. There is no other possibility.
And do you think that's why Starmer cracked down so hard on the so-called rioters in the UK?
Well, right. It's a Band-Aid solution, right? So he's got to find a way to resolve the friction that is happening today, but he is temporarily myopic, right? He's not looking down the line, right? So when I say to people, hey, I've been warning you for decades, it's not because I want to be the obnoxious guy who sits in the back of the room telling you I told you so. It's because I'm frustrated at the fact that it takes so long for people to respond to signals that should be easily readable by anyone that has half of a brain, right? So again, physicians who specialize in diabetes can tell you exactly what the trajectory of the disease will be if you let it fester and don't try to treat it. There is no mystery involved. It's very predictable because it has a recurring pattern to it. So if you let in millions of people who have endemic Jew hatred as a definitional value within their societies, why should you be surprised that there will be increased Jew hatred in the host societies? Again, it doesn't take fancy Professor Dr. Gad Saad to close that circle for you. But again, I think the problem, Dan, is, and that this is a real regrettable part of the architecture of the human mind, people don't wish to respond to something until it bites their proverbial buttocks, right? So there is no diabetes until I get diabetes, and then I will pay attention.
Which is
for example,
why there were big discussions about the dangers of extreme Islam after 9/11 in the US and after 7/7 in the UK. But it feels like, I mean, tell me if you agree, but it feels like the tyranny of woke has stopped those discussions from taking place.
Right. I mean, and that's why both, I mean, earlier you mentioned Elon Musk. That's why both Elon and I completely agree that the absolute most dangerous force in nature is a parasitized mind, because all of the dreadful things that happen in society, short of things that are, acts of God, as they say, right? A tsunami is not caused by you, but most of the historically egregious things that have taken place throughout human history, it's because it started with someone having a really bad idea. So this Austrian guy with a little mustache decides that the real problem in Germany is these parasites called Jews. And if we could only get rid of that cancer called Jews, then everything will fall into place and we'll have the utopia that we deserve. And a whole bunch of people say, yeah, that sounds like a great idea. And so if you look throughout all of history, it begins with a parasitized mind. Nothing is more important than trying to get people to think critically. But boy, after spending 30 plus years doing it, Dan, I'm losing hope, buddy.
I know. So am I. And look, societal breakdown comes in so many forms. And I was struck by the fact that even the chaos and carnage at the Notting Hill Carnival in London had made it to you, Gad, because this video of, I guess, grotty sexual positions being simulated has gone around the world. I'll show you just a small portion. And Gad, you responded to that by saying civilized societies recognize the distinction between the public and private spheres. Once this delineation falters, you are no longer a civilized society. Moral people recognize what it means to be dignified in public. And of course, this is an event, and I'll come to it in just a second, but this is an event which has seen multiple stabbings, huge amounts of crime, yet our leaders, Keir Starmer and Sadiq Khan, don't even condemn that. They don't want to talk about it because this is a Caribbean event. It's a woke event.
Well, and so I'll trace back that exact debauchery and the unwillingness to people to comment in the way that I did in that post to a specific parasitic idea that I discuss in the Parasitic Mind, which is cultural relativism, right? So cultural relativism is an idea that was developed about 100 years ago by an anthropologist by the name of Franz Boas, who argued that you can't talk about human universals. Every culture has to be judged according to its own idiosyncrasies. And for you to judge other cultures is a form of cultural imperialism. And so you can see how that sets up the shackles whereby people no longer feel comfortable criticizing that. No, I'm going to criticize that. It's not as though I'm a sexual Puritan person, who's from the Victorian age, right? But those are things that you can pursue privately. If I'm walking in that event with my young children, I don't want to see twerking with doggy style, not because I'm unwilling to engage in those behaviors privately, but that's why there is a distinction between public and private, right? But people are shackled precisely as you said, because, well, it's a Caribbean event. The skin hue of the people engaging in the debauchery is darker than mine. Therefore, I must remain silent. No, it's a deontological principle. Engaging in doggy style in public is not something that should be condoned in a civil society.
No, indeed. And of course, especially when the event is full of violence. I mean, Harriet Sargent, the commentator over here, wrote about the mother who ended up in hospital. She's still fighting for her life. What kind of man stabs a woman in the groin in front of her child? She's had 2 operations, a hysterectomy, and may lose a leg. This was on Family Day at Notting Hill Carnival. She was an innocent bystander, only trying to stop a fight. But none of our politicians are brave enough to talk about it because of the cultural significance, as they say, of the event. But I do want to show you a couple of our brave commentators over here, Gad. I'm not sure if you're aware of them. Probably you are. But it's not just me who's been cancelled. And actually what's brilliant about this independent space is that a lot of us are fighting back. And both of these people, Jim Davidson and Katie Hopkins, have very funny but very pertinent takes on the Notting Hill Carnival that I want to show you, and I'll get you to react off the back. So this is Jim Davidson first.
Anyway, let's talk about the Notting Hill Carnival. A police spokesman said it was wonderful. They even put some wokey thing on there, didn't they, about how nice it was. And then another guy, a spokesman, or was it one of the bosses, saying, we're sick and tired every year of saying to the families of people that have been stabbed, you know, we're sorry, and it was mostly peaceful. Well, there's 385 arrests that went on. As firearms were people arrested for firearms. There was people, loads and loads of people arrested for these zombie knives that now the Metropolitan Police are saying, if you get a zombie knife and hand it in anonymously, we'll give you a tenner. Good God. Did they do any stop and search? Is it, again, two-tier policing? So these people that have been stabbed, how many have been arrested? Did we arrest the people? Do we get a picture of them? Do we see anybody like that? Are they going to be fast-tracked? Or are the courts full of people, 50-year-old grandmothers that have put on their website, I don't think that the boat should come to this country. Well, that's a hate crime. We'll bang you up. You're very easy. But we're not sending the policemen into the Notting Hill Carnival because they'll only end up twerking and dancing with a load of people, showing what sissies they are. But they can't arrest people because we're too frightened and we don't want to upset the black community. What is going on? I mean, this really is fucking ridiculous, isn't it?
And here's Katie Hopkins.
Back from Notting Hill Carnival, nearly lost my voice from so much shouting, and it's been a brilliant few days. Honestly, you've never seen the capital like it. We got to piss where we wanted, we got to dance on top of bus stops, we got to rub our vaginas up on strangers and policemen, and they did nothing about it. And then there was just like 340 mostly peaceful arrests, and also 8 mostly peaceful stabbings. 4 people are still in intensive care and 1's in a coma. She was a mum with a kid that tried to stop a fight. But, you know, let us party on, because it is a glorious representation of London at its best, because diversity is absolutely our strength. Back from Nottingham.
Again, I think the reason people are turning to Katie and to Jim and turning off the mainstream media is that they are prepared, sometimes in comedy form, to present a truth which is completely different to what folks see in the mainstream media over here, because it was just like the Black Lives Matter riots across America in 2020. The mainstream media over here, be it Sly News or the British Bashing Corporation, are saying these were mostly peaceful events. You know, we've got to put the stabbing into context. So you don't get honesty now, actually, even about really horrifying events from the media because of the woke mind virus.
Yeah, indeed. I didn't know the gentleman. I don't think I knew him, but I certainly knew of Katie's work. And I love the fact that she's using satire and comedy. So in the Parasitic Mind, I basically say that satire is akin to the surgeon's scalpel cutting through warm butter, right? I mean, the reason why dictators will first get rid of the satirists before they get rid of the guys with the big muscles, right? The guys with the big muscles, we can handle them because we have all the guns. The one who is dangerous is the one with the sharp tongue, right? So this is why, by the way, I use, and you probably, I know that you follow some of my work, Dan, I use all sorts of comedy in mocking all of these imbeciles, right? Now, a lot of my astoundingly imbecilic academic colleagues will say, oh, but that demeans you as a professor. No, it doesn't demean me. Millions of people know me. Nobody gives a shit about any of your work, right? Because I will use any persuasion strategy that is necessary in order to awaken people. Sometimes I'm very professorial. Other times I am a satirist. Other times I hide under the desk pretending that I am fearful. Other times I will also don colorful wigs the way Katie did to demonstrate that, I am woke. So all bets are off when it comes to engaging in the battle of ideas, and humor and satire is astoundingly powerful in shining the light on bullshit.
Yeah, even sometimes, by the way, when we're dealing with very difficult topics. I mean, you made me chuckle the other day with some of your posts surrounding the gang rapes that are going on and the messages that you were delivering to Keir Starmer again. Now, it's not something you'd usually think that you should laugh at, but it's pointing out the absurdity of how those sorts of acts are now presented in such an intellectually dishonest way.
Yeah, I mean, so in case, because you didn't show the tweet, so usually I will feign indignation when someone says rapist, and I say, please don't say the word rapist because it will marginalize the rapist. Rather, it is undocumented lovemaking, right? But that's the kind of linguistic dystopia that we're facing. By the way, that language creates reality is what I call the granddaddy of all parasitic ideas. It stems from postmodernism, which purports that there are no objective truths. And a variant of postmodernism is deconstructionism from Jacques Derrida, the French postmodern philosopher, where he basically argued there is no reality outside of the language that is used to describe reality. And this is why the progressives are so keen on constantly playing these language semantic games, because if there is no objective reality, well, then I can shape reality in any way that I want by relabeling things. And that's what I mock when I call a rapist an undocumented lovemaker.
Yes, indeed. Indeed. And sometimes we have to mock what's going on. The other issue that we have, of course, is that our leaders, our Western leaders, who you're highly critical of for good reason, tell us something that we know not to be true. And I want to present, again, two examples for you from the past 24 hours here in the UK, Gad. So the first is that a man escaped prison altogether even though he threw cement at Nigel Farage while Nigel Farage was campaigning before the last election. So, of course, guns are not particularly prevalent in the UK, but this was a potentially deadly attack on someone running for public office. He escaped jail altogether, and this was Nigel's reaction to it.
So there I was in Barnsley campaigning in a general election, and a lout opposite side of a street gets a cup, fills it with cement, lobs it at the bus that I'm on. And you can see the picture here of me ducking and me shouting to everybody else, get down. It was a very dangerous, provocative, violent thing for this guy to do. Luckily, some builders who were working on the site stopped him, apprehended him. He was arrested. Today, he's been given a suspended prison sentence. He will not serve any custodial time at all. But you see, in Keir Starmer's Britain, if he put something intemperate on Facebook after a couple of glasses of wine, he would have gone to prison. And that's the mess we're in. Can you believe in the year to March, 147,000 people guilty of carrying knives, some of sexual offences, have been given community orders, which means they don't get criminal sentences. Our prisons are full. We're letting people out who are violent offenders to put Facebook offenders, thought speech, some of it not very nice, I'll accept, and to chuck them in prison for a short period of time. Law and order, crime is out of control. We're even allowing people to go shoplifting up to 200 quid without being prosecuted. You simply couldn't make it up. And I've got a feeling that all of you out there, regardless what age you are increasingly concerned going out of an evening, walking around our streets, catching public transport. We have to build more prisons. We have to make those that are violent. We have to make those that threaten our society pay some kind of price. Without deterrence, this can only get worse.
And Gad, I wanted to contrast that with a news item from the far left Channel 4 who were embedded with the police in Middlesbrough to arrest an 11-year-old. An 11-year-old who was tied up in the recent violence post the Southport massacre. Watch this.
This is the moment police raid the home of a mother
Stop taking pictures of me!
and a son suspected of violent disorder in Middlesbrough. We joined Cleveland police as they carried out Operation Macadamia, targeting those connected to the unrest earlier this month.
Some of these people potentially will try to escape.
Final brief as teams prep for arrest raids across Teesside.
I was a Silver Commander on for
11 years old. And the media is acting as if that's normal.
Let me draw a couple of points. or make a couple of points. Number one, the nickname, the qualifier, or whatever, the moniker, two-tier is really a good one, a powerful one. And I'd like to draw an analogy with Islamic principles. So Sharia law, right, the Islamic law, recognizes, codifies that a crime will have a different punishment depending on the identity of the perpetrator and of the victim. That's in law. So a Jewish man kills a Muslim woman is not the same as a Muslim woman killing a Jewish man. I mean, that's why Lady Justice has the blindfolds on, because it is supposed to be the case that you met out justice independently of your individual markers. So imagine that now Britain, the bastion of Western liberty, is imitating Sharia law as its foundational judicial principle. So that's number one. Number two, regarding this idea of arresting people for mean tweets and mean posts, and in this case, a ridiculous case of an 11-year-old. So I am a free speech absolutist. So what does that mean? How do I actually walk the walk and talk the talk? There is nothing more insulting than being a Holocaust denier, and certainly to a person who's Jewish, and certainly to a person who has my personal history and my childhood. And yet I support the right of Holocaust deniers to spew the most offensive of possible speeches, right? The historically documented extermination of a people. There is nothing more offensive than saying, I don't think it ever happened. But in a free society that truly values freedom of speech, we have to tolerate the falsehood spreaders, the imbeciles, the racists, the bigots. That's the cost that you have to bear to exist in a free society. And again, it goes to my earlier point, Dan, which is freedom of speech is deontological. And it certainly can't be deontological if you are going as a police force to arrest an 11-year-old. It's simply baffling, and it will lead to civil war.
Yeah, no, I agree. So brilliantly put. Look, we have so much more to talk about, Gad. The Pope and Justin Trudeau next. And then later, I know you've turned on Candice Owens, and I want to discuss why. But first, what's so important about being independent is, you know, I only tell you about products that I use and truly believe in. So today, let me talk to you about Verso. As you may know, I've entered my 40s, really focused on staying healthy. And it was after a very stressful year that I decided that I wanted to be as fit and sharp as possible while living a good life and being busy and engaged. So I'm exercising, doing the 16-8 fast, but scientists like David Sinclair proved that we can now help reverse aging with interventions that go beyond healthy habits. So for me, I was looking for a product that I knew would enhance everything I was already doing, backed up by solid evidence. So that's why I use Cellbean by Verso. It has scientifically proven ingredients that fight the effects of aging by increasing NAD+ levels, which is the stuff that powers every cell in your body. I've personally been taking the product now for a number of months. Right at the start of the day, it has been transformative for me. Fasting's easier, my fat's down, I'm eating less, it's got blood sugar regulation effects, so I'm craving less, sleeping better too. I would love you to experience the same thing. And to give you a bit of faith, Verso publishes third-party testing from each batch produced to guarantee that you are getting what you paid for. I'm very excited to say that as our launch spoker, Verso is offering you an amazing offer. If you head right now to buy.ver.so/outspoken, you will save 15% on your first order today. All you need to do is use the coupon code OUTSPOKEN when you check out. The link is on our show notes in YouTube and Rumble. But to repeat, that's bui.ver.so/outspoken. Use the coupon code OUTSPOKEN. But now back to the show, and Gad Saad returns. Gad, the Pope is now saying that it's not compassionate, it's not empathetic, it's not the right thing to do to not accept all forms of refugees, asylum seekers, illegal immigrants, however you want to term them, into your country. Watch this.
Bisogna dirlo con chiarezza. C'è chi opera sistematicamente e con ogni mezzo per respingere i migranti. per respingere i migranti.
And Gad, you say this is an example of suicidal empathy. What do you mean?
Well, look, suicidal empathy, let me explain the framework that I'm using. The emotion of empathy is perfectly valid and adaptive, evolutionarily speaking, as long as it is deployed within certain, functional ranges, right? So, for example, before I come back to empathy, take, for example, OCD, obsessive compulsive disorder. It's a psychiatric disorder, but that is otherwise rooted in an adaptive process. The idea of my washing my hands because I just shook someone's hands and I noticed that he had sneezed in his hand beforehand, that makes perfect evolutionary sense. But if I spend 8 hours washing my hands, then that becomes maladaptive. So it's an hyperactivation of an otherwise adaptive process. That's what OCD is. Well, I argue for a similar mechanism when it comes to empathy. To be empathetic to the right person in the right circumstance, in the right situation, is perfectly adaptive. We are a social species, so it makes perfect evolutionary sense that we have evolved a wide range of emotions, including compassion, kindness, generosity, and empathy. The problem arises, hence suicidal empathy, when it hyperactivates, when it misfires, when it targets the wrong targets, right? So if you care more about the Guatemalan illegal immigrants than you do for your American vets, that's suicidal empathy. If you claim that we should let in everybody because everybody deserves an equal chance at the American dream, while you hide dear pontiff behind the walls of the Vatican, that's suicidal empathy. So suicidal empathy is the misfiring of an otherwise adaptive process. So in my next book, what I do is I demonstrate that many of the dreadful policy decisions that have led the West to the abyss of infinite lunacy stem from this misguided suicidal empathy.
And one of the men who is most behind those policies is someone you know a lot about, a certain Justin Trudeau. Here's his latest.
Here's something we can all agree on. We need more housing in Canada. But that the government should step up and make sure that housing gets built, that's where some people disagree. Take federal lands, land that's owned by the federal government that isn't being used anymore. The Conservative Party leader wants to sell it all off to make a quick buck. That does nothing for you.
Gad, you didn't hold back, saying, you know, that this lobotomized degenerate is hard at work because her sleeves are rolled up. Yes, it's her. Do you think we're going to get it even worse, though, with Starmer? Because I feel like Trudeau took a little while to emerge as the true authoritarian weirdo that he is. It's been instant here.
So I don't know what is the educational pathway of your prime minister, although from the little that I've seen, it seems quite disastrous. But the reason why I think Justin is a unique beast is because he literally, Dan, is a walking manifestation of every single parasitic idea that I discuss in the Parasitic Mind. So I'll give you an example. When he was a parliamentarian, before he became prime minister, the Conservative government of Stephen Harper had put out a pamphlet or a press release, whatever, saying that, look, in Canada, we will not tolerate barbaric practices like child brides and honor killings and female genital mutilation. So Justin Trudeau, in his incredibly castrated, hyperbolic, actor way, got on television and was indignant that Harper would use the word barbaric to describe the practices of another noble culture. So he wasn't upset by the actual barbaric acts. He was upset by you calling them barbaric, which is a whole melange of postmodernism, cultural relativism, and so on. So that's precisely why I say that Justin Trudeau exemplifies, epitomizes all that is wrong. So I can't exactly speak as to which of the two is worse, whether it's Keir or whether it's Justin, but Keir is certainly trying to outdo Justin, which is not a good thing for Britain.
No, it's not. A little bit of pop culture before we move to the after show, Gad. I know you were just as taken as me by the fact that Amazon has made a historic English king in the 1700s, I think it is, black, disabled, and queer. Watch this.
Your Majesty! Hurricanes! Simot pie. Oh, you look terrible.
I don't think I look that bad, actually.
Hello, brother. Cousin Jane. Your Highness says it's a pleasure.
Sweet, Bess. Jane and I...
And you say reality lags behind prophetic satire. Oh, the world's gone mad.
It's unbelievable. I mean, the reason, by the way, why I can only speak for myself. I can't speak for other satirists. The reason why my satire is prophetic is because I use the following cognitive trick, Dan. I simply take a current phenomenon and I push it to its natural, extravagant boundary condition. Then I satirize that position, and then I fold my arms and wait for reality to catch up, right? It's not because I'm a Delphic oracle that I'm able to predict these things. It's because I realize what the downstream effect of a particular lunacy is, and then I satirize it, and then reality catches up. That Amazon show is doing exactly that, because many of us had predicted these types of recasting of historical figures.
Indeed, indeed. Thank you so much for watching Dan Wootton Outspoken. Please do subscribe if you want lots more clips and interviews like that. Plus, if you want to watch our totally uncensored after show, then visit www.outspoken.live.